tell me a little bit about yourself. How did you get into audiobooks?
My background is radio, which I started right into college, basically. I was curious about it. People always said that I had a radio voice. I didn't really know what that meant, but okay. So I took a class or two during my first semester in college, wound up working at the school radio station that semester, and they asked me to stay over the summer, and I did, and it just kind of went and grew from there. So background in radio, if you're familiar with the theme song from WKRP, Up and Down the Dial, that's pretty much how I've been. A lot of us are. We might go from town to town and up and down the dial. I've been from 89.1 to 107.9, so from bottom to top of the dial and a number of places in between. Always using my voice on air and doing commercials and interviews and what you do in radio. And going on almost 10 years ago, a couple of buddies of mine from California they were narrating books. Dan said, David's narrating books, and are you interested in maybe learning how to do that? It's like narrating audiobooks. I heard of books on tape, CD. I listened to some, yeah, but narrating them, it was new to me. I had never really considered doing that because it's long form audio as opposed to commercials, which is more short form audio. And it takes a different stamina, different approach. The idea that I could have my own studio at home, do this on the side in addition to radio. So I started doing that and I started loving it and been doing it ever since. Going on November will be 10 years. This year, I hadn't really realized that until we just started talking about that it was 2016. And I want to keep going with as many more books as I can. It's something that I can do, hopefully, if my voice stays for the rest of my life.
Yeah, that's awesome. You do have a voice for radio. How?
Thank you. It has helped open some doors that way. It's also my voice has gotten me in trouble a time or two. Um, Especially when I was in school, the teacher, for some reason, could always hear who was whispering when they weren't supposed to be. So a
Yeah.
great voice certainly is helpful, but it's not imperative. There are many, many, many audiobook narrators that don't have that voice, and that's okay because how they use it is more important, actually, than what it sounds like,
Right. And I
if you're to
think,
pick the two.
especially for nonfiction authors, I think a lot of readers want to hear their book written or narrated by the author
Mm.
themselves. I think it's a little different than fiction. Like, I don't necessarily need to hear Stephen King read me his story, but I do want to hear, James Clear read me his book. And so
Sure.
you're helping essentially nonfiction or all authors learn to narrate their own books. But I think especially for nonfiction, if people are watching this and being like, "Oh, I hate my voice," like that doesn't matter as much.
Well, that's exactly right. I think it's perhaps more natural for someone on a nonfiction book who's writing a how-to or a memoir, a professional book. They may also do podcasting and guest conference speaking and so on. So they're a little more familiar with that. And it does make sense, like you say, that, hey, I wrote the book. I'd like to be the voice of the book because it's part of my brand. It's part of who I am. It's part of my coaching or conference speaking. If you want to voice your own, narrate your own, then you certainly should explore doing that. Even if you don't have a radio voice, you probably have a voice that a lot of people like listening to already. Think of the audience of a podcast, think of the audience at a conference. They like your voice.
Let's backtrack a little bit to talk about why should an author even have an audiobook to begin with? Like, why is that so
Hmm.
important?
Well, it's growing so fast. I think is one reason. And back in our early days, we could only get the paperback book. And then came along this magical little thing called ebook. And a lot of people started utilizing those because we could carry it on this little thing in our pocket and read it while we're in the waiting room. And then part of that came too with the accessibility of audio. And there's always been audio storytelling. I mean, go back to a garden. that's talked about in the Bible. There's audio storytelling way, way back then, and throughout all of our history moving forward, books on tape, really recorded books started just over 100 years ago on records, and then books on cassettes and on CDs, and now it's all digital. And because it's so easily accessible, and because the performances can be so compelling, more and more and more people are saying, I I get the audiobook first, or I get the audiobook with the print book so I can go back and forth from reading when I'm at home with my cup of tea, or I can hear it while I'm walking the dog. And I can pick back up one place to the other. And there are some people who only want to do one or the other. So I think it's one reason is accessibility for a broader audience. I'm finding more and more people will probably look for the audiobook first. So if you're a professional who's written a book and there's somebody else who's also turned their book similar to yours into an audiobook and they like audiobooks, they're probably getting the, the sale, not you. So you may be missing some, not a huge, but some of an audience. So exposure, expanding your audience, another way to get your story out to the world. I think probably my favorite reason in answer to your question, Jesse, is that it's a chance for somebody to hear your real voice. You. They can read your words, but they hear you say your words. It comes across a lot differently, right? Can make a different impact, especially for people who are more auditory.
And I think particularly for, a lot of my audience, they are on podcasts, they're doing podcast interviews, maybe they have their own podcasts, so they understand like, okay, we're all listening to audio. You can listen to it while you're doing the dishes or like you said, walking the dog. I think, and so that makes it more accessible for people who are maybe busy or just trying to,
Hmm.
do other things. But then the physical accessibility of an audiobook. Um, so I had an eye injury a few years ago and I couldn't read. And reading is like the thing that I do for fun. So I couldn't
Wow.
read. So
Yeah,
all I did was
that
like lay in
is
bed
quite
listening
a
to audiobooks.
quite a loss all of a sudden
Right.
with that. So you kind of dove into audiobooks as a way to keep up with story
Yeah.
just in a different format. And
Yeah.
how did that go?
It was really fun actually because I do listen to podcasts but hadn't really been an audiobook listener. But when it was like, all right, well, I can't read and I can't watch anything, all I can do is
Hmm.
listen. It was very, very wonderful to kind of have that option to immerse in some of my favorite authors and get this comfort, well, in like a really
Hmm.
hard time. I wanted to ask you about you're clearly standing in your studio, right? And I wanted to ask you
Yes.
about the kind of setup and what is it that if an author was going to narrate their own
Hmm.
audiobook, what do they need?
Yeah, I've been in professional studios for many, many years, and so the idea of do I really want to build my own and what would it take and how much would it cost? And what I learned and through some friends and trial and error and practice and experimenting is that to be a narrator at home, you don't always have to go buy and utilize a high dollar professional studio. That's one of the big mistakes that people make is doing that or believing that they have to. I don't have a professional built studio for the work that I do. People think I should sometimes. But if I'm going to coach somebody, I've been successful using this. And if I'm going to coach somebody, I want to be able to show them my setup and they can do something similar as well without having to have that high dollar studio.
Hmm.
So what I'm using now, I've used several different variations, but what I'm using now used to be a guest bathroom that we don't use. It's the perfect size for what I want to be able to do. It's got my equipment, and I'm not using all the professional gear, at least that you can't see. You always see the foam and the cones and professional looking, black. I
Oh,
don't know why
right,
they're
yeah.
always black, but they're always black
So
foam.
they're dramatic.
I guess. And I've had that, and I have some strategically placed in the most reflective points in the studio, but I've covered them up on things that I like to see. I have a blanket on front of me that you can't see that is of my favorite football team. Behind me is a quilt that my wife, my mom, and mother-in-law all three collaborated and had a hand in making just for me. It's a design that's made just for me. I'm from Colorado, and it's got a mountain and the sun and some snow, and so they made this just for me. And I use it as a sound absorbing, sound reflection material. Things that
Mhm.
are soft, um, and it works for what I'm doing. And I think people at home can do the same kind of thing using blankets or pillows, quilts, blackout curtains can help as well. Things that deaden the sound of your voice because your voice is like energy and it goes somewhere and it bounces off the wall and comes back at you and then bounces around in the room. And if it bounces off my screen or the wall in front of me and bounces off the wall beside me and then hits the wall behind me and then comes back to the microphone, there's milliseconds delay in that. But it's recording that sound as well. And that's where you get that tinny, echoey effect that you hear sometimes
Yeah.
is because it's bouncing around the room and coming back into the microphone. So by having sound deadening material in your recording space, or what I like to call your storytelling space, then that energy, that sound energy, it absorbs. It deflects to another part of the room and absorbs. And the more times it bounces around and absorption, it dies that much more quickly and it deadens the sound in your space. If you want to test this at home, do this. Go into your bathroom and talk out loud in there and hear what it sounds like. And then go into your walk-in closet and talk out loud in there and hear what it sounds like. These two rooms are totally different from one another. One has nothing but hard surfaces everywhere. The counter, the tile floor, the walls. Sound reverberates and bounces all over the place. When you go to your walk-in closet, you have hanging clothes everywhere, folded clothes everywhere, soft surfaces, probably carpet in there, or a nice, luxurious rug, because who wants to walk on cold tile first thing in the morning, right? So there's things that deflect, reflect, absorb, soften all that sound. They are totally different sounds. So if you're going to start recording, use your walk-in closet as a good space to start in, or build a space that has some absorbent or reflective material. You don't have to cover your walls entirely like I did, but you can strategically place things in highly reflective points to help minimize that echo effect, that tinny
Mhm.
effect, and sound better automatically. You
I
can
know
also get
my
closer to your microphone because that makes a difference too. A lot of people on videos, well, their microphone is 2.5 feet from them because it's on the screen. And all of that distance, all that separation between the microphone creates that ambient sound noise, and it's that echo can happen in there. And it's not how you want to record an audiobook. It's fine for a podcast, perhaps, a video call, Zoom call, sure, but not for an audiobook. So one of the things they can do is hang some blankets, hang some curtains.
Yeah, I know my fiction narrator for the sci-fi books, he had his studio was in a walk-in closet
Oh,
and
yes,
just
yeah.
draped in blankets. And at one
Yep.
point it was pretty, I'm in Portland, Oregon. It was pretty warm here one summer, and he posted a photo of himself on Instagram recording because, he couldn't have the AC on, right? Because the background
Right.
noise. And he was just
Yeah.
drenched in sweat. And he's like, but I finished the book. And I was like, that was my book you were working on. Don't kill yourself, JS. What are you
Yeah.
doing? I was like,
Yeah. No, that's
stop it.
exactly
You
right.
could,
Airflow is
I'm
a
not in that
problem.
much of a rush.
Airflow is a problem. So a professional studio will build in things for airflow to help minimize that. And so you have to adjust a little bit because I have the same problem.
Hmm.
I don't have airflow in here when I'm working. I still have the bathroom fan. So I turn that on to help draw air in and exhaust the warm air out. I open the door up and do that. But while I'm recording, I don't do that because the noise just from the fan alone makes room noise, and you don't want that in your audiobook as
Hmm.
well because nobody wants to hear that. Oh, that's the bathroom fan? Ooh.
Where did he record this? You mentioned this before we started recording the call, but you're in a guest bathroom, correct? That's where you created
Yes.
your studio.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's where I am now. We don't use it as such, and it's the perfect space and size for what I want to do. That way I can use the closet for the closet, and the water closet now is my recording closet or
Mhm.
my storytelling space, as I do like to call it. I think it's 6 by 4 internally. So it's just a nice size for what I do. Gives enough room for the sound energy waves to bounce around a little bit and die before it gets
Mhm.
back to the microphone. But you can use a walk-in closet or corner of a room uh, gets used most often. I've seen people build something in a corner that gets used as a normal office desk, and then behind them, maybe take curtains and hang them from clothesline or fishing line from the ceiling. And so when you want to record, draw those behind you so that it makes a little bit of a square or rectangle area to record in. And then when you're done, just draw those back to the wall and they're out of the way and you can use your space for other things because what you want to be able to do, you're not going to record your audiobook in one day, typically. You might have to take several sessions over any number of days. And you want to come back to the same space and have it sound the same.
Yeah.
So that one chapter sounds going into the next chapter, it sounds the same. Sometimes when I listen to audiobooks, I can tell when they started a new day. um, their energy's higher that day, or something is different, and I can tell when that is. But you don't want a dramatic difference between one chapter to the next chapter. So if your space is created and you can consistently keep it that way while you're recording the book, whether it's at your office, place in the office, wherever it happens to be, try not to mess it up too much while you're recording.
Do you have any advice on equipment? Like, do you need a super fancy microphone, or will
Mm.
a decent $100 one get you by? Or what? Yeah, what do people need that
Yeah,
wise?
one of the mistakes it's easy to do is to think that you buy $1,000, $1,200, $1,500 microphone because that's the one that everybody recommends. And they're very good. I wish I had one. But if you take a really, really good microphone and you put it in a not so really good room, it picks up every flaw. And you have to
Mm,
tweak your sound in post-production because it'll pick up things you don't hear until you hear it back. What is that from? Where's that? So yeah, a really, really good microphone can make you sound really good, but it can also sound not so good unless you have a really good room. So what I learned was to use a pretty decent condenser microphone and do all my voice work that way. Now, am I auditioning for a national Ford commercial voiceover or Disney? No, I'm not. I'm not competing in that. If I were, I'd have to have a professional studio and a $1,500 Neumann microphone because that's what they have. I'd have to have all the gear. But as an audiobook narrator, especially doing one or two or three books your own, you don't need all that. You can get a decent microphone. I think the one I typically recommend is $150 to $175, depending on when and where you buy it. And it works for what you want to do. You can get some that are $200 or $300 and work beautifully. I wouldn't get a Blue Yeti or a gaming microphone, especially, those headsets and that kind of thing. They record audio, but part of that is they just don't have a clean sound, meaning every microphone produces its own internal electronic noise, and
mm,
then they have their own sound style to them. And so a cheap microphone uses inexpensive parts, and they can sound that way, and they're fine for certain things, like maybe a podcast or gaming, Zoom calls. It's fine. A lot of people have them, but I don't recommend trying to use those for your audiobook because it just is much harder to get the sound quality that places like Audible require in order
gotcha.
to put your book at retail. There's requirements, and if you can't meet those, I get calls from authors who are like, my audio is being rejected, sound quality, can you help me fix it? Most of the time, no, you
Mm.
can't. There's only so many magical things you can do. At least me, I'm not a professional sound engineer. Now, maybe if you hired one of them, they could find some ways to do that. Um, and I've put a couple of people in touch with folks I know to try and do that. I don't know if they did or not. Usually I just recommend to get a decent room, get a decent mic, and re-record it. And honestly, your second recording will be better because you've gone through the whole process and you're more relaxed, you're more familiar, more comfortable. You'll read it better the second time anyway. They don't believe me until they do it, but
Well, I've
but
definitely
it's
found
true.
that with, I've recorded videos for courses or little master classes and things like
Yeah.
that. And there was one 30-minute recording. I got to the end. I was like, oh, thank God, how wonderful. I'm finally done with it. I had not hit record. So I had to do the whole thing again. And you know what? It was much better the second time. I, hit all of my lines a lot better. And there
Mhm.
you are. Sometimes doing it the second time is better.
What you did was rehearse it the first
Exactly.
time.
Yep.
And now you are familiar and comfortable with it so that when you redo it, those same words come out of your mouth a lot differently because of that familiarity and that comfort. And so I'm glad you told that story because that's exactly what happens.
Yeah. That was only a 30-minute masterclass, though. That wasn't a
That
10-hour
wasn't a,
audiobook.
yeah, that wasn't a
That would
10
have
hour
made me
audio.
cry.
Well, I usually recommend testing your audio, record 15 minutes and make it exactly like it's supposed to be, and then keep doing that. Don't record 3 hours and then find out you can't use it. No, that's bad.
Yeah. That's great advice. Always test a little bit first.
Sure, it's easy to do.
So once the audio is recorded, what is the next step of the process? And is that still something an author can do themselves, or do they need to hire somebody out for that?
Yeah, you can go both ways with that as well. Some folks do that. They record the audio and then send it to somebody else to do the what's called mastering or even the editing, the mastering, the processing, the post-production work that needs to take place to take out any little hiccups. You want to minimize sounds you don't want and increase sounds you like in terms of equalization, different frequencies. You want to minimize the boost and but you need to be careful, doing too many high end and all these kinds of things um, that you can send to somebody that's familiar with that kind of work and what audio uh, does, what audiobooks need, and have them do that for you. Sound engineers are perfect for that. You can do some things yourself as well, very simple things. It's easy to get lost in the weeds and start experimenting and playing. And I'd say go for it if you're curious about that, but do that before you actually record your book. Test all that, play with it, find something that's like, oh, I like that. This works. Now I do that. And then you can make in the program I use, you can make macros where you can say, I want to do these 5 steps, and you can put them all in a macro in order that you want them done, and then you run that macro on every file before you save it to upload, and they all process the same way. And that does the whole file. You do want to proof listen for mistakes, missed words, missed paragraphs, double paragraphs, but also for clicks and pops and weird sounds. Since we don't have soundproof studios, you'll hear the neighbor's dog sometimes. Maybe you didn't hear it when you were recording it, but you can hear it when you're playing it back. And we want to fix those little areas as best we can with that. So that's post-production. And make it sound as good as you possibly can, like you do with book editing. You don't
Mhm.
turn out slop for somebody to read. That's disrespectful, in my opinion. Don't do the same thing with audio. Make it as good as you possibly can. They're paying money to hear your work. Make it worth what they're paying for it. So go clean it up. Make it sound as good as you possibly can with that. Do some equalization, do some processing, and then make it match the file quality that Audible and other places need in order
Mhm.
to send it to retail. They'll reject it and send it back and say, fix it before they put it to retail. They have standards, and I understand why. So I help walk people through meeting those standards and fixing it hopefully before the audiobook is recorded, because that's the hardest part.
one of the reasons that we were talking is you'd sent me this checklist of the different things that you need, the how to set up your space, the type of mic to use, the program,
Yeah.
stuff like that. So we're going to link to that in the
Yeah,
show
my
notes
little
here.
three-step guide kind of talks about a little bit of the things about the microphone and setting up your space, and then the audio recording equipment or the digital audio workstation, DAW, DAW for short. There are ones, fancy ones you can buy as well. You can use simpler ones like the one I use because for recording audio, you don't need all the bells and whistles that really high-end fancy ones do for music recording and stage production and movie studio production. You don't need to spend all that kind of money, and it'll do 1,000 things you'll never use. You want something simple that does the one thing that you want it to do, and the 10 other things that will help it sound good as well. So my guide kind of talks about those three particular areas to get somebody who's curious started that they could DIY all they want to.
Awesome. And then where can people find out more about you and your work?
Yeah,
Where?
I do a newsletter called DIY hyphen, and every writer knows what a hyphen is. DIY-audiobooks.com. It's a newsletter on Substack where I talk about a lot of these things. I have the 5 essentials for recording good audio. That's essentially where I think everybody needs to start because we talk about the time it takes to record audio, the terminology that you need to know instead of all the 100 things you don't need to know, the technology, which includes the microphone, also the studio space we've talked about, and then the storytelling, the actual recording of it, the narrating of it is in there as well. So the 5 essentials, I think, can get a lot of people started and all the way through recording their audiobook and do it themselves from start to finish if they want to do the whole thing themselves. And a lot of people like to DIY. I do. But I've learned to say you don't have to LIY. You can DIY, but don't learn it yourself. Get some help from other great consultants and coaches. Like you're a writing coach. You understand that somebody comes to you and says, I need help with this, that, and the other thing. Same idea, right? You help other business owners and creators write, get their words out of them because they may not be professional writers. These are not professional narrators either.
hmm
You help them get their words on paper. I help them take those words on paper and turn it into words in audio. Same kind of thing.
Yeah, I think that has been one of the biggest lessons of my life to learn is that you don't have to just figure everything out on your own. Like whether it is
What?
going on YouTube and finding somebody who's already put a cabinet like this together, or, in the last couple of years, I hired a fitness coach, which I was like, I can figure out how to work out. But I
Yeah,
have managed, since I started working with her, I have not injured myself working out, which I was just constantly like
really?
lifting a weight long and wrong and hurting myself, or running
Okay.
incorrectly and hurting myself. And I was like, oh, I did need to learn this. And I did need someone to teach it to me. So yeah.
Right. And then you find that it's like I was making all these mistakes. I had no idea. I think all teaching, all instructing and coaching is to show somebody, let's do it this way.
Mhm.
Here's what you're struggling with. I've got an idea to help you do it this way. I think this will work. Give this a try. Hey, good job. I know you help. I think you say that you help folks find peace in the chaos while finding time for their most important work. And I think that's so important too, because so many times you find how many people come to you and they're all ready to pull their hair out,
A
or they're
lot.
just overwhelmed and they're ready to quit. And so
Yeah.
finding peace in the midst of that probably is such. It's like you've been on the ocean for weeks and you see land.
Yeah, my favorite calls are the ones that end with a coaching client who was like started at the beginning being like, "Oh my gosh, I don't know how I'm never going to be able to do this. Like, what am I even doing on a call with you?" And by the
Mm,
end, they're like, "Okay, yeah, I'll get you that chapter next week." And I'm like, "Yeah, you
right.
will. I know you will."
Because people come to you that way for sure. But we want to find ways to help people tell their stories to the world
hmm
and serve the audience that they serve.
Yeah.
I did want to ask you if I could,
Oh,
because
sure.
I've spent some time reading things on your website, but you've written about something that was intriguing to me. You call it selling story. And I think I understand a little bit of it from reading on your blog about it, but can you share with me what you mean? What does that look like? What is selling story versus, or is it versus storytelling, or is it the same kind of what is that?
Yeah, so it's the same kind of concept, but basically, the stories that we tell for entertainment, you can also tell for sales and marketing, right? And so that's
Okay.
kind of the distinction I was making. Like a good story has all of these elements, but if you have for a good selling story, which my definition of that is a story that you're telling to make a specific point and have your listener take a specific action, whether that is sign up for
Hmm.
my newsletter because of this or buy my product or whatever it is. So a good selling story needs to also have kind of that a really good
Hmm.
call to action at the end of it, but to get to the point where that call to action makes sense, you need to kind of know that your story is going to resonate in the right way with the audience.
Hmm.
And
Okay.
so,
Yes.
yeah, the
I
the
totally see that.
stories versus selling stories is about, here's how to tell a good story.
Hmm.
Here's how to tell a good story that resonates with your audience in a specific way to get them to take
Ah,
action.
okay. Okay. Because storytelling in and of itself may not necessarily sell something. It just may
Hmm.
entertain. You can sell without storytelling. You can storytell without selling. This combines to with a specific end result in mind. Is
Right.
that sound about right?
Hmm.
Okay. So you gear a story along a particular narrative arc to reach a particular point so that they make a decision.
Yep.
Okay. Interesting. Because most people that don't know story tell the events in chronological order. And then he said, and I was like, and then she said,
Yep.
and it can get a little dry and drawn out and boring. You need to know the craft of storytelling. See, and I'm pretty good at narrating other people's writing. And I'm fascinated with talking to writers, authors who do storytelling because I learn so much about the craft, the art and science, I think, the frameworks, um, outlines, the backstories, not telling everything chronologically sometimes, starting in a midpoint, the BAB, what is it? BA um, CA, or no, I forget what the format is, but you start out with part B, like right now.
Hmm.
My documentary making friend is telling me about this. We're starting out right now. And then we're using that to transition to the background
Hmm.
of how this place or ski place got to where it is, and then bringing it back to now with what's happening with the current people because it's been around for 50 years. And then the next part is the future, what comes next.
Yeah.
So there's this BAC or B, I forget the letters now.
BABC.
Yeah, yeah, that's it.
Yeah, no, it's funny. I haven't heard it expressed like the BABC, but that makes total sense. And
Yeah.
a lot of books are written that way. It's kind of start
Okay.
in this middle of this scene, and then there's like, you may be wondering how we got here. you know,
Right. Yeah.
back to the beginning and get
That's
back
it.
up and then
Or the
into the
TV shows that
climax.
say, 3 weeks earlier or 3 months
Yeah,
earlier.
exactly.
Same kind of thing. They start out with it and then you're like, what is going on?
Hmm.
Oh, okay. Get the backstory. You
Yep.
wrote something else on your blog too about because I can narrate an hour of finished audio is about 9,300 words. That's the industry average. That's not a standard. Like you have to meet that kind of thing. That's the goal.
Hmm.
I came out of the world of radio and I talk way too fast because that's what we did in radio. We talked really, really fast. That was the way to get, as many words as you could in 15 seconds over the song intro before the lyrics started singing, or a 30-second commercial that had 45 seconds worth of words they wanted in 29 and a half seconds. So we talk fast. And so when I went into audiobooks, it was like slam on the brakes. And I practiced so hard to try and I would highlight 155 words, which is the average for 9,300 words in an hour. I would highlight that on the page and I would practice reading that over and over and over until I could get the feel and the rhythm and the pace for being that. Now, I don't shoot for that as a goal every single time now, but mentally, physically, I get the difference. Where when I first started out, it was so challenging for me to reach that. And I just would go in my studio and just practice. But you wrote about writing 2,000 words per hour, which to me, since I type about 40 words a minute, sounds like a lot of words. Can you walk me through how you do that a little bit? How do you do two? Because you're writing keyboard type, right? Or
Dictation.
dictation. Okay. Oh, I was
Yep.
wondering if you were going to say that. Okay.
Yep. Yeah.
Yeah.
So
Okay.
that's how I can write.
Audio writing.
Yeah. So I kind of started training myself to dictate years ago because I wanted to get away from the computer, right? Like we're always staring at the computer screen too much as
Mhm.
writers. So
Yeah.
I wanted to be able to go for a walk and tell a story. So I trained myself years ago for that. Again, this came in very handy when I could not stare at a screen during
Mm.
the peak of my eye
That's
injury.
right. I didn't even think about you writing the challenge that would be when
Yeah.
you couldn't use a keyboard as well. So that answers that question.
hmm
Okay.
But it also, like at this point, I've kind of retrained my brain to that's my preferred mode of writing now, at least a
Really?
first draft. So I'll go for a walk and tell myself the story. I will, if I'm writing a blog post, I'll jot down, here's the 5 points I want to make, and I'll either go for a walk or I now have a dictation software on my computer called Whisper Flow that I use
Okay.
just to write in email. I dictate all my emails. I dictate almost everything now. It's a little bit more of a learning curve writing fiction because there's a lot more like trying to evoke a scene and being in another character's voice. But when it comes to writing my own nonfiction, like
Hmm.
I'm just I'm so much faster in my own voice for writing this nonfiction and it doesn't come out as stilted. You know, I really I have a client right now who she was getting really frustrated with just trying to like write down these stories. And she was like, man, I was like, tell them, you're telling me this story. Like, just speak it into I gave her some apps and things. I was like, or just use voice record on your phone.
Right. Yeah.
And she came back, she's like, oh, this is great. And the first chapter that she sent me, you could tell that she dictated a lot of it, but it was in her voice and it was great. I was
Yeah.
like, okay, we can edit that. Like, you're not staring at the screen being like, what can I do here? So,
Well, you probably find yourself editing less as you're speaking,
mhm.
I'm guessing, because I've talked to people that write and they will get some things out there and then they're reviewing what they've just written and then they want to go back and change it all and they can lose that storytelling flow to that sometimes I think as they're
Yeah.
going. So by telling the story aloud where it's being recorded into a dictation, you probably you don't edit yourself as you go as much. Then you edit later when it's
Yeah.
probably because it puts it on paper or not on
So,
paper, but I mean it records the words in a written form.
yeah, so there's a couple different ways I do it. The Whisperflow app that I mentioned,
Hmm.
it records it directly, like it types things out as you're speaking. It's kind of a voice to
Oh,
text.
okay,
So
cool.
that's something that you would use like on your laptop. But I also, there's a couple different transcription apps that I use where I just go for a walk and I record a long audio file. And then I come back and I
Mm,
upload it and it transcribes it for me. And then I just
okay,
take that draft. So you have to, again, with
okay,
audio quality is important, less important than because nobody else has to listen to it.
right,
But I
yeah.
definitely have been like, oh, that was why is that section all messed up? Oh, I was walking over the highway at that point. A lot of road traffic.
It's it's picking up the background noise
Yeah.
and doesn't know how to interpret it.
Yeah.
I see. No, that would make sense. So a walk in the woods might be preferable than walking
Yes.
along the highway. But I
But you have
love
to
that
go
because
somewhere. if you're walking in the woods, you have to go somewhere where you're not passing a bunch of other hikers, especially if you're writing a thriller novel where you're like, and then she picked up the gun and he slashed at her with a knife, and you're just like, oh, hi, hi.
Right. Yeah. Just telling myself a story. Don't
Yeah,
be alarmed. It's okay.
exactly.
It's nothing to see here. Oh my goodness. Yeah. Yeah, you could literally say I'm talking to myself and I'm telling, I'm writing a story that way. So I love that being able to create in that way using audio. I have heard of people doing that kind of thing, and I am going to look into that because I do a little bit of newsletter writing, and I am so cumbersome with my fingers on a keyboard, and I find myself going back to try and edit everything as I go. And oh, I want to bold this, and oh, I want to indent that, and instead of just getting the words there, but when I talk, I get the words there,
Oh
and
yeah.
then you go back and format and edit later, right?
Dictation would be so perfect for you.
Goodness.
Yeah, Whisper
Well, I'm
Flow.
glad we
Check that
talked
out.
because
Yeah.
that's going to save me a whole bunch of time.
Yes. Oh my gosh.
That's great. I like that. So that's your secret as well for writing. So when you say writing, would you say 2,000 words complete, or is that your first draft?
Definitely a
Or
first draft.
okay, but that's a lot of words
Yeah, I mean it
for
gets
a
a
draft. I mean, that's a lot of words.
yeah, for a thriller novel, I mean that's a chapter. My thrillers tend to have
Okay,
chapters about 2,000 to 2,500 words, so
okay.
I can dictate a chapter in an hour and then go back and revise it
So
afterwards.
five of those, in a 5 hour day, you could write an entire hour of audio. I
Hmm.
mean, of the finished audio that I mentioned at 2,000 words an hour, 5 hours, you've got an entire hour worth of audio. Do you find that when you dictate, do you start with an idea or and know where you want to go with that? Like, do you have an outline on scrap paper as you walk or in your head or a plan for that, or do you just walk and talk and see where it goes?
Sometimes either way. So
Hmm.
I normally outline my books pretty heavily, so I know what
Okay.
I want to happen. And same with like a blog post, I normally am like, here's the topic, here's like three things. And so I might write that down. I might just kind of know what I want. Um, but I have found the more that I've done this, the more that I'm able to just say, okay, I want to talk about this today, and then
Hmm.
just go out and kind of brain dump a pretty decent draft, especially even with fiction. Like that took me a long time to build up that skill, but I can be like, all right, so we're in this scenario and she needs to, what's going to happen? And just go and tell myself the story in the same way that I used to kind of need to either write longhand or even kind of do some free flow typing. But I've
Okay.
managed to kind of tap into that.
You are a ghostwriter as well as a coach and an author, so you've got your fingers in a lot of different things. I don't know if you have a favorite or one that you do more of than the other, but when you're ghostwriting, do you do all the interviews with somebody over a certain amount of time or days and then take that material and put together the book them that way, or would you encourage them to do their own dictation and send you I guess, the rough draft, to then do editing and formatting and go from
Mhm.
there? Or do you do both of those, or which one is your preference?
I have done it both ways. My preference is very much doing an interview because that way I can,
Okay.
if they say something that I'm like, I don't really understand, so let's go deeper into that,
Mm.
or I can get a lot of clarification that way. And one thing about being a ghostwriter is I'm normally not a subject matter expert in whatever the topic
Oh,
is.
okay. Right.
So I'm kind of a stand-in for the reader who also is not an expert because that's why they're reading this book. So
Okay.
very often I can be like, all right, we need to slow down on that. I don't get that. And they're like, oh, okay, because as the expert, they don't often see
Yeah.
the gaps. And so the times when people have dictated a chapter, I often like there's a lot more back and forth, and I have to be like, I need more information here, I need more
Mm.
information there.
Okay. Sure.
So I
You'll
vastly
help
prefer
them.
doing interviews.
Okay. That makes sense. Yeah. Because if they're just going to dictate, you'd have to then follow up with those same questions and I was thinking it might speed the process along, but really might make it more cumbersome,
Yeah.
is what I'm guessing. Okay. Let's say they want you to ghostwrite. Do you walk them through a progression of story to fill in things, or do you just let them talk? What's your interview process like?
Yeah. So essentially, I kind of have there's an upfront interview process where we're figuring the book out together. And some authors have come to me with, they've already got a book proposal and an outline, and they just need the book written, in which case we don't have to do this part.
Okay.
But if somebody comes to me with an idea, then, I'm talking to them about who's your audience, what is your goal of this book? You know, what do you hope people are going to do afterwards? Is it join your program? Is it hire you as a consultant? Is it just
Okay.
change their life and live a better life? And so we're figuring out kind of the whole book. And then we come up with an outline and have, make it fairly detailed so that then when we get to the part where we're actually writing the book, then we just kind of talk through the outline. And so
Mm,
it's like, all right, so chapter one, we wanted to write about this. Tell me about this. All right, I have some questions. Okay, now tell me about this next part. And so
okay.
that's kind of how that works.
So you're gleaning information from their expertise to put into that outline.
Hmm.
Okay. And so then go back to the what we were talking about a little bit ago with the selling story then. So you want to draw stories out of them, have them tell stories
Yeah,
with a
yeah.
particular point and angle to that, I'll bet. Is that becomes part of your writing process then?
Yeah. So, as we're going through this outline and they're like, here's this piece of my framework that I like to teach. And I'm like, okay, tell me a story where somebody you
Mm,
taught that and it affected somebody. Tell me a lot of, my a lot of my clients are coaches. And so I'll be like, all right, tell me about one of your
huh.
clients and how this process worked for them. Or, there might be stories from their past, like well, how did you come up with that? What was the impetus for coming up with this framework? I had some of my clients are natural storytellers and they love it.
Okay.
I had this one client who he doesn't do a lot of personal storytelling, and
Hmm.
he's written a lot of blog posts. He's been a writer for years, but you go back through his posts and he rarely talks about himself. And I was
Hmm.
like, dude, we need a little bit more here. And so I'd be like, okay, it was, and he knew it too. Like we were
Hmm.
both very aware of this issue. And he's like, all right, I have to come up with a story now, don't I? And I'm like, yep, you got to come up with a story. I'll help you. Like I'll poke at your past. We'll find something. So
Well, yeah, you can make use of a metaphor or analogy sometimes in those cases, I
yeah,
suppose, but most of us have gotten to where we are and have a story, but sometimes it needs to be drawn out,
yeah.
right? Um, because they may not be natural storytellers or think that their stories are any that anybody want to listen to.
Hmm. Yeah.
I don't
And
have
then,
anything interesting about me. Why, who would want to listen to my stories about my fishing trip with my dad when I was 9?
right.
Well,
And
maybe a
like
lot of people.
I'm ghostwriting a memoir right now, and this guy's very much a
Okay.
natural storyteller.
Okay.
And it just feels like you're sitting across the table from him where he's,
Hmm.
oh, and then this other time, and then this time, and then, oh my gosh, this. So I have the opposite problem where I'm like, well, we can't have,
You can't
we,
have to pick
we
and
got, we
choose.
gotta choose which is the best story of all of these
Right.
crazy
Well, it gives
times.
you a lot of material to work with, though, right?
Yeah,
So,
exactly.
it's not like, oh gosh, that was not very good. We got to flush this out. No, it's like we got to trim these down. So, opposite problem. Yeah.
Hmm.
Storytelling, whether it's on paper or in audio, it differentiates us from the synthetic
Hmm.
because it makes us really who we are. And you can't, I guess you can mimic that, but you
But
can't
it feels like
fake it.
mimicry.
It does.
Yeah.
It feels synthetic. It feels fake. And I'm not trying to disparage the use of AI. I think there's probably a lot of powerful things that we can do faster, but the stories ought to be real. The
Hmm.
voice ought to be real because that real, I think, is what connects our humanity together. We're real people connecting together in this particular time and space on this particular thing. And you can't fake that, right? And
Yeah.
other people who are hungry for story want the same thing. They want to hear that. They want to read that. They want to connect with that, and not just something that's always made up. I love science fiction stories. I narrated the book I was telling you about, where I had to start the whole hour over because of the water problem, studio problem, is a six-part science fiction series. And it feels to me like an Old West set in science fiction. And I loved it. It was great. I had so much fun. It was so much fun because I could do anything with the character voices that I wanted to do. It was so much fun to be able to do that. And that is all fantasy, areas, make believe, it's made up. But the connections between all of the characters felt real.
Hmm.
Their interactions, their relationships, how they progressed and grew closer together or further apart over the course of the stories. All that was based on real things, and that's what people want to connect with. So you draw those stories out of these people who say, I don't have any stories, or I have too many
Hmm.
stories, and find that golden nugget
Yep. The ones
that's
that
going
are
to
the
connect with
create that
their
connection.
audience.
Yeah.
Yeah, make that connection. I love that. I love that. Not just a bunch of facts in chronological order.
Hmm.
Do this, then do that, then do this other thing like it's a recipe, right?
Right. Because A, that's not as interesting. I write nonfiction, I coach people in nonfiction, but I come from, I still write thrillers. I
Hmm.
write fast-paced science fiction. I want to write a page turner, and that's what I want to read, you know,
I
even if
see.
it's even if it's a self-help book, like I want it to grip me and I want there to be stories. I want me to
Mm.
want to turn the page. And so that's why I'm so big on storytelling, is because I just, you know, keep people interested.
So, how did you get started? You asked me when we started. How did you get started in writing and in particularly thrillers and science fiction? What is it about that genre, or those genres, because they're overlap and
Yeah.
they're separate, right? But so tell me about what was it that grabbed Jesse and said, I want to write this.
I've always written books since I was a kid, and I think I started off with fantasy and just, loved The Hobbit and the Patricia
Yeah.
Briggs and, a bunch
Mm.
of not no, Patricia McKillip, sorry. Patricia Briggs came later. She's more urban fantasy. But a lot of, Ursula Le Guin, loved those stories and wanted to write that when I was growing up.
Mm.
And then I don't really remember when my tastes changed more to sci-fi, but it was maybe around college. And I was still working on a fantasy novel, but once I was done with that, the next thing I decided to write was more science fictional. And I think one of the things that I really like about sci-fi is that you get to make everything up and it's not fact checkable.
Right.
And if somebody says that's not the way gravity works here, and you're like, well, I'm going to change the name of the planet and call it set in a different solar system, and
And do what
there
I
you go.
want.
Yeah,
Right.
my husband is my sci-fi fact checker, and I say that in like he
Okay.
finds the facts that are wrong, and then I delete those facts. Like I don't fix them. I just okay, well, I don't.
Uh,
My favorite example of this is I had a scene where it was characters talking and I was having them like dock with a space station while they were talking. And I got all of those orbital mechanicals wrong or whatever.
oh, okay.
And he read the scene. He's like, well, actually, it needs to happen like this. And then they do this. And then they and I was like, that's 5 pages of us just talking about thrusters, and nobody wants that. I will
And it's
just
boring.
I will just start the scene once they're already docked.
This is true. You could just eliminate all that and say they docked. And
Yeah.
then what happened?
The point is the conversation. It is not
Oh,
the
okay.
the
Uh,
orbital mechanics here. So
mm,
yeah. So that's how I write my sci-fi.
I see.
And
Okay, cool.
so thriller, I started to realize that's mostly what I read now. Like
Hmm.
probably, I don't know. I've always liked mysteries. And in fact, my
Well,
sci-fi, they're crime thrillers, but set in space or on other planets. That's basically the genre
okay.
is a crime thriller in sci-fi clothing. So yeah,
I love it.
yeah.
That's so fun. I'm interested in how people come into doing that. I started with, my voice, but my fascination with story goes back to fifth grade, and Mrs. Shockey. And every day after lunch, she would have us sit on the floor and she would read to us out loud. This is why I like story out loud, because I first heard The Hobbit
Hmm.
and The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe and Mrs. Frisbee and the Rats of Nim and The Phantom Tollbooth. I mean, these are books that she read to us, and I was fascinated by all of these. And I would go home and read them on my own, along with many other things. But the whole idea of out loud storytelling has stayed with me. And so even though I didn't go that route for years and years because I did radio, I drift over to that because when the idea is presented to me, it's like, well, that just seems natural to me
Hmm.
to tell story out loud, whether it's a selling story, a personal story, or some sort of anecdote about something that can make an impact on somebody else's life, even if it's in outer space and make believe. I
Hmm.
love that. The stories of our own lives are identified very often in those lives of the stories that we read or
Hmm.
see or hear, right? I
Yeah.
identify with this particular character, that particular person's storyline, whatever that happens to be, and the impact that it can make on me. I still remember those, those things that I've read that have made that kind of impact on me. And then when I had kids, I'm reading those same stories to my own kids so that they can then turn around and read them as well. And hopefully, one of the goals I have as a ski instructor is to pass along the same passion for the sport that I have to somebody else so they enjoy
Hmm.
it as much as I do for the rest of their life, like I have. And I bring that same idea in to narrating, that I can pass along some ability to be able to share their story out loud with the rest of the world and enjoy that as much as I do. And they can do that with all their books.
Hmm. Yeah, and I
Hmm.
think that's definitely why I have gotten into ghostwriting and coaching and
Yeah.
helping people bring their books out into the world because it's a process that I love to do for myself, and I just love seeing more of us telling our own stories.
Passing that along, that
Yeah.
ability to be able to tell that story and share it with somebody else is
Hmm.
why yeah, that's the why that we do what we do. So I
Yeah.
like that. That's
I like
great.
that too.
Yeah.
Well, Todd, this has been a really wonderful conversation. I've had so much fun chatting with you about audiobooks and narration and storytelling and taking all these fun tangents.
You're right.
So,
Yeah, we didn't have an outline or a goal. We just said, let's chat. And so we have.